Hey there, Real Estate Junkies. Before we dive into today's episode, we've got some game-changing resources to help you start buying and selling real estate on terms, the smart, creative way. Want to learn how to invest with little or no money down? Grab your free ebook, The 4 Game Plans, and discover the exact strategies we use every day. Get it now. The link is in the show notes. Looking for a complete step-by-step system to start making 3 paydays per deal? Check out the Quantum Leap System, our home study course packed with everything you need to close your first terms deal. Need a personalized strategy? Book a free one-on-one strategy session with one of our coaches. Just use coupon FREE3 at checkout. Ready to take action? Join the 3 Payday Apprentice Program and start working toward real estate success with direct mentorship. Want hands-on training with us? Spend 3 days at our In the Trenches Bootcamp, where we'll work side by side to lock in deals. And don't miss our biggest event of the year, QOS Live 2025. Connect with top investors, sharpen your skills, and take your business to the next level. Secure your spot today. All links are right below in the show notes. Click now and start building your real estate empire. Now, let's get into today's episode. What we do with the tenant buyers, or how we acquire tenant buyers, that I totally neglected the seller side. And this house didn't sell back in the day. I gave the house back after it was a 90-day marketing period. I gave the house back, and then I came back to the seller side and I didn't have any leads because I didn't fill that funnel. So our advice to you, if you are getting your first deal under contract, is yes, you want to do your money producing activities first, which is speaking to potential buyers, but you also need to be calling as well, filling your funnel on the other side. Welcome back, everybody, to Real Estate Junkies, coast to coast. I am your West Coast representative, Rusty Ham.
And I'm Rick Abbiati, coming from the East Coast in the state of
New Hampshire. I am it's been very cold, Rick, the last couple of days in the San Diego area. It hasn't been fun. I don't like the cold weather, but Friday it's supposed to be 95. So there you have it.
What's cold? 70 degrees?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think my wife turns on the heat when it's below 70.
I remember living in San Diego for a year and a half, and it was like 65 degrees, and people had ski jackets on.
Yeah, it was brutal. Yeah, 'cause my daughter she played some softball games last week at San Diego State, and it was 80 degrees when we left, and then when we went over the hill past Escondido into San Diego, it was 64. It was brutal. Hated it. Hated it. Let's get started, Rick, with our warm-up. Our warm-up, again, is mindset, skill set, and systems. Today we're going to talk about it's going to be a mindset. And then with our game plan, we do have the 4 game plans, right? The lease purchase, owner financing, subject to, and executive lease purchase, or AO. But what do we do once we get those houses under contract? We got to find buyers. And we usually do the rent to own buyers. So we'll talk about the buyer side after we get a house under contract, a taken, and then our cool down. We're going to talk about our deals. We're in the trenches along with the associates, right? So we're going to talk about my recent house under contract and your recent payday 3. So let's get into the mindset, Rick. We have associates that, I said it right off the bat, they defeat themselves prior to even trying to get the house under contract. Explain what their mindset issue is.
I mean, I've heard this multiple times. Geez, I got to take it. I got a property under contract. Now, what if I can't sell it? What if there's no buyers? Oh, this is a rural property. I'm going to have a hard time selling it. Some of my properties have been very rural, and some of them sold the quickest. So you can't defeat yourself up front without going through the process, and you'd be surprised what happens. And it doesn't matter whether it's a price range or whether it's location. It really doesn't matter because, Rusty, as you've heard, the what's the phrase? The house in the forest becomes the house on the ocean front
Yeah.
for a buyer.
Yeah. Yeah. The buyers are out there, and we call that projecting, right? You're projecting whatever situation that is. You're projecting that because of this, you're not going to find a buyer. Even before that, even before they get a house under contract, we just had a group call, and someone was like, I was eliminating certain houses. I was looking because we tell them not to look up the house prior to making calls, right? And he says, what if it's not moving ready? And I said, who cares? Just get on the phone. So they even qualify it. I think they qualify it prior to even making the phone call. So now they're qualifying these buyers without even attempting to see if a buyer wants a house in the forest.
We sometimes have properties that they're livable, but they need a lot of work. And if you're looking at wholesaling or flipping, you may be thinking, what kind of work am I going to have to put on this property before I get a buyer? You don't, because it allows the buyer to build equity in the property. And I had one that required extensive renovations, and it was a young guy that bought it. He closed out. Closed it out in 2 years, and it's his now. So he wanted to build in his own equity.
Yeah, of course you want to. And again, we're not looking to get discounts from sellers, but if there does need to be a lot of extensive work, we do want to get it at a good price so we can sell it, so that like you said, the future buyer can gain that instant equity by putting in their own work. So talk about the mindset on the buyer, because some of the associates that it's their first taken. So what is the mindset with not only that, the buyer side, meaning what if I can't sell it, but just the mindset in general, because they're brand new. This is their first take, and they don't. Now it's like they're freaking out. Okay, what do I do?
Yeah, and that, because of the way we work, we're in the trenches with you. And that's something you definitely do not have to worry about. I've heard time and time again. What about the buyer side? What about the buyer side? What do I do with the buyers? Don't worry about that until you have a property under contract. That's when and I wouldn't say even worry about it then. Just lean on us, and we walk you through, between Nick and us coaches, we walk you through that whole entire process.
Right. Yeah, my first mistake, I had my first taken, and I totally neglected the seller side. Right, I was focusing so hard on qualifying these buyers, and we're going to talk about that in a second. What we do with the tenant buyers, or how we acquire tenant buyers, that I totally neglected the seller side. And this house didn't sell back in the day. I gave the house back after it was a 90-day marketing period. I gave the house back, and then I came back to the seller side, and I didn't have any leads because I didn't fill that funnel. So our advice to you, if you are getting your first deal under contract, is yes, you want to do your money producing activities first, which is speaking to potential buyers, but you also need to be calling as well, filling your funnel on the other side.
Yeah, and I had two of my properties, they were side by side. I bought them both together, both 2 bedroom, 1 bath. And so I was marketing them simultaneously. So I had 500 inquiries on those properties. And I'm thinking, how am I going to call sellers? And it was a lesson learned. It was like, okay, I need to hire somebody to handle the buyer side. And so now my executive assistant, Megan, she's wonderful. She handles all the buyer inquiries. So that took a real load off me and allows me to focus more on the seller side.
Yeah, super huge. And that was 4 deals in, right? So you got your first payday one and your second payday. And we talked about scaling. I think last week we talked about scaling, when to scale, when to get the EA, when to get that VA. I just rehired a VA. She started to make dials for me. I asked her to do some admin for me for this new buyer. So now she's going to input these leads into my CRM now. And so that's going to be helpful, because that took a lot of time to get these emails of these leads, and I was copying and pasting their information into my CRM, and that was taking forever. I remember that last time I had a house under contract. So it's a good problem to have, right? You want to do those money producing activities first. And if you can hire somebody to do the small stuff so that you can just go into your CRM, make a dial, call the buyer, say, hey, this is a rent to own only. So let's get into that. Let's pivot. Good segue. Rick, hypothetically, you get a house under contract with a seller, either lease purchase, owner financing sub 2, or an executive lease purchase AO. You get that house under contract, then what?
Then you're immediately going to give us the information, get it to your coach, all the property details, what the comps are, the price you want to take it to market for, the market rent, the rent comps, and then we'll come up with a pricing plan that you'll take it to market for. And at that point, you draft up your property description that you're going to post online, and we use Prosperity, which uses Appfolio, which distributes it throughout many different websites online. So it's got a very broad distribution, and we'll walk you through that process. The other thing you want to do is order signs, obviously, because you'll need to market property with signs. And then what you'll also do is be creative on how you market. Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. You could go to it like if it's maybe near a lake, for instance, a lake home. There may be a general store or something nearby where you can post something there in the store. So be creative on your marketing.
Yeah, especially those rural areas like mine. We're going to talk about my deal in a second, but it's in the mountains, right? It's not in the ski resort area, but it's just below the ski resort. So that's a good point where I can just go to maybe the ski resort general store or whatever, or maybe down the hill where I can just post something and someone looks at it, and which is cool. What I did is I made a QR code. Rick, I don't know if you do that, but I made a QR code, and I can put that QR code on let's say a flyer, and somebody can just zap it on their phone and look at it. Yeah. And so again, this is rent to own only, and that is our first but not our only exit strategy. So our first exit strategy on these homes is the rent to own, where, okay, now describe. So you said that this Prosperity sends it out to a bunch of websites. Now these websites are usually rental websites, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So about 85% of your leads that are going to come in are just looking to rent. So you got to weed them out. That's a tedious part. That's why probably having an EA or a VA sift through those is important, because again, you want to do money producing activities. And if someone is looking just to rent, that's not money producing. It's a non-lead. So you want to sift through those and really talk to the people that it's almost like on the seller side, that they're open to the idea of maybe doing rent to own, that they want to own someday. They just can't afford it. Now, describe a rent-to-own buyer. What does a rent-to-own buyer look like to us?
So a rent-to-own buyer, it could be a renter. It could be somebody that has wanted to buy a house, and they may be looking at what's for rent, and they see a rent-to-own, and the light goes off, and they think, wait a minute, maybe this is my opportunity to buy a home. So, when they contact us, whether it's through email or an inquiry through Appfolio or Craigslist or whatever, we're going to reach out to them and ask if they've watched a How Rent to Own Works video that's on our websites. And we don't answer any questions, because some of those questions will be answered in the video. And they will go and they'll watch the video, and you just tell them, unfortunately, rent to own is not for everybody, not a good fit for everybody. But watch the video, and if it looks like it may be a fit for you, call me back and we'll schedule a viewing. And a good rent-to-own buyer will do everything that you ask them to do.
Yep. And then those rent-to-own buyers, again, some people have a skewed view of a traditional rent-to-own buyer, because some people who do the rent-to-own out there, they don't know what they're doing. To be honest with you, our success rate is very high because of the way we do it. And the traditional, and let me just say or I would say the misconception of rent to own is a 1 to 3% down with a rental with their rent and some of that rent going towards the purchase price of the home. Would that be accurate to say?
Yep. Yep. Because I've heard that many times.
Yeah. And the reason why that traditionally doesn't work is that's like a renter. We're looking for buyers, right? Hypothetically, let's say it doesn't work out the way I just described it. Let's say it doesn't work out. The odds of the house coming back to you in good shape is very low. Because renters, and I'm not saying all renters are dirty and they're going to trash your place, but if they don't feel like it's their home, they don't treat it very well. So describe our qualifications and how we vet and why it's successful.
We're very fortunate to be partnered with a company that's been doing it for over 30 years, formerly in the mortgage business, Paul Ritter, and they do a complete credit check, of course. And of course, well, let me come back to the credit thing, but to do a credit check, debt to income ratio analysis, so what their mortgage and their income will look like when their lease period is up, so they're mortgage ready. They'll do a complete background check, sex offender registry. It's nearly 100 pages or more report. And they tell us this buyer will be ready, mortgage ready in 12 to 18 or 18 to 24 months. If that tenant buyer requires credit repair, and we've had many people come in with 5 to 600 credit scores, they put them through a credit repair program, which is designed to get them mortgage ready. It's very thorough, and they actually meet with all the prospective tenant buyers face to face on Zoom to go through everything with them.
Yeah, and that's huge, right? Because now they feel like they're buying the home, not renting the home. And then the second part to that is we charge a non-refundable down payment, and this is why it's successful, from 3 to 10%. And the reason why we do that is, you said it before, we want them to be mortgage ready. And if someone comes in, hypothetically 1 to 3%, that's typically lower than what a traditional lender would want. And then at the end of the day, they might need to come in with more money and they might not have it. And then all of a sudden their option runs out and you're kicking them out. You're trying to evict them. Ours is on the flip side. We're asking for a very large down payment, enough that at the end of the day, the lender's going to say, oh, okay, you're ready to go. You put down 10% already. You're golden. Here's your loan, right? What people freak out about is that it's a rent payment. It's a lease payment, right? It's a lease option with the option to buy. So when we have our contract with the buyer, it's just a straight lease payment, right? And then they give us a large down payment because we're treating them as a buyer. So they're putting a large down payment down, and then we're passing all the expenses on to the buyer. Maintenance, repairs, we're actually going to require them to pay the taxes, and then any whatever utilities and all that kind of stuff. So it's for us, we're landlords, right? But we've passed all those expenses that a normal landlord would have, which is sometimes you're paying a management company to take care of all that stuff that I just described, right? So that's the difference between what we do and what other rent-to-own programs do.
And we're not taking phone calls at 2:00 in the morning and saying, oh, my toilet's plugged. So you're just basically collecting a check. And as far as passing the taxes off to the buyer, it's no different than if they have a mortgage. They're going to be paying taxes and insurance on top of that.
And they're going to have a lease payment. They'll be paying taxes on the home. And then they're going to have their own insurance, right? Renter's insurance. So so again, we're treating them like they're a buyer. And that's why we have a high success rate, and then hypothetically, let's say life event happens, right? Because that does happen. We're actually going to talk about next week. But if a life event does happen and they are unable to fulfill their option, a lot of times you get that house back and it's pristine because they've been treating it in pretty good shape. Cool. Anything else on the buyer side?
Yep. One thing that we do before we put the buyer through screening when they go to do their viewing is we send them what we call a next step form. And that next step form is our pre-screening. So it'll have them put down what their down payment is or what they have for down payment and their employment their background in employment, income, and stuff like that. We know up front that they need to make at least 3 times what their monthly rent payment is plus taxes. And if they say, I've got 5,000 to put down, okay, that's all well and good, but we're trying to set you up so you're successful to get your mortgage. That's the main objective here. So over the next year, what additional can you add to that? And then you project it out over a 2-year period. So you want to get them up close to 10% by the end of the 2-year period.
So that the transition from us to finding a lender is smooth. And then they don't have the sticker shock. We call it sticker shock, right? Because the lease payment plus the taxes, all that is going to be pretty close to what their future payment's going to look like. And so a lot of times in these other rent to own, it's a low rental, right? And yes, some of that might go towards your purchase price, but then they go get a loan and all of a sudden their payment has jumped up to $2,500. And then all of a sudden they can't afford it. Like you said, we're setting up our buyers for success. We don't want to run buyer after buyer through our program. We get a house under contract. We want one buyer, and we want that one buyer to cash out in 18 to 24 months. Because if they don't, we don't get paid.
And see, there are other people out there that claim to do rent to own, and they make their money up front, and they really don't care what happens, whether the buyer is successful or not, which isn't right in our minds. So we do it the right way.
Yeah, it's like a revolving door. We do all of our transactions with the highest integrity as part of our core values. Good stuff, Rick. Let's transition into our deals. I recently got a house under contract, an executive lease purchase. When I find my tenant buyer, which we just described, I'm going to assign that tenant buyer back to the seller, and the seller is then going to take control. The reason why we call it an executive lease purchase is the seller is getting all the benefits that we would normally get if we stayed in the middle, right? So the tenant buyer, I'm going to share a portion of the down payment with the buyer or the seller. Then the seller is going to get the cash flow and the principal pay down on their loan. And then they're also going to get the markup that I marked it up at on the tenant buyer side. So he's getting all the benefits that we normally would get if we stayed in the middle. I was saying earlier, this is in the mountains. And like you said, because I had a house in the mountains before, Rick, and it didn't go well. I had to give the house back. And so I was very, mindset-wise, very negative about mountain houses. But this is different. I have a better mindset now. I'm going to attack it differently. And I think I'm going to get a tenant buyer pretty quick. I've already had a few inquiries. So it's a $500,000 home. Well, I'm buying at $460,000, selling at $499,000. I hope we get 10%. If I get 10%, it's $50K. And I'm splitting that 50-50 with the seller. So it's just a one wham bam, thank you, ma'am, and then I'm done. Describe that though with an executive lease person. Are we truly done once we assign the buyer?
No, we're not truly done because actually the tenant buyer, if they don't come up with a whole 10% down up front, they submit their additional down payments to us. And of course, then we distribute the portion with the seller and we keep our portion. But you also want the buyer to be successful. So in fact, this happened to me just week before last, where the seller on my AO or executive lease purchase had asked me some questions about the down payment. And so I explained to him again the process, but I just stay on top of it to make sure everything's running smoothly. And I told him that about 10 months ahead of time, we'll start getting them ready to get their mortgage. I just said, reach out to me and I can assist with that. So ultimately, it looks good. You keep that relationship, which is the best thing to do.
Yeah, again, all of our transactions are done with the highest integrity. When you do assign a buyer to the seller, you're releasing any and all obligations regarding that transaction. However, I did the same thing. My first taken was an AO. My second taken, actually, $1.1 million AO, Rick, and they didn't give me 10% upfront. Right up front, $1 million home, the lender's going to at minimum ask for 10%, if not more. So we did get them to 10% eventually. And so when those damn payments came in, I still had that relationship with the seller. I obviously had to wire that money to him as well, and he really liked that. And then we communicated after he was like, "Hey, how's it going?" So we had a good relationship even after when the buyer cashed him out. We still continue to have a conversation, because what if they have multiple properties and this one goes well, then they can reach out to you again and say, "Hey, let's do this again on my other property." Cool. That's my success story and our cool down. Let's pivot to you and we call it a payday 3. We call it a sold, right? So there's 2 different solds in our community. One sold is getting a down payment from a tenant buyer. That's one sold, because you sold him. Did the lease option with the option to buy. The other sold is a payday 3, which is when they get a loan and they cash you out. And then there's a HUD statement. So describe your payday 3.
So this was on an owner finance deal. It was a 48-month owner finance deal. And like often happens, the tenant buyer cashes it out and closes on it within 24 months. This actually closed out after 25 months, just with some delays in financing because it was through FHA, which requires some wickets to get through. So it was just logistics is all it was. But the tenant buyer closed on it. We closed with an attorney yesterday, and there's 14,700 payday 3, which is under what my projected payday 3 was because they closed out early.
Yeah, and great point, because you said it was a 48-month term with the seller, and theoretically you could have strung the buyer along for the whole 48 months. But we do 48 months for a reason, is because we're conservative investors. Hypothetically, let's say your buyer, and we're going to get into that next week, but hypothetically, if your buyer didn't perform, you have now a 2-year window where you can do anything you want. You could have sold it traditionally, you could have found another rent-to-own buyer, or you could have rented it traditionally or Airbnb it. So there's 4 different exit strategies you could have done hypothetically if your tenant buyer didn't perform, correct? So this one performed, and you're getting paid. So like I said, the sooner the tenant buyer cashes you out, the quicker you get paid. The reason why we have longer terms is, like I just said, is in case something does happen, because all of our transactions aren't perfect, but if we have a long enough term, we're able to pivot, right? We need to be able to pivot so we can satisfy the seller at the end of the day.
And it does, if I had made the mistake on my first one, which was a lease purchase, it was a 48-month, actually, it was 60-month lease purchase with the seller, that I did the lease purchase agreement with the tenant buyer for 48 months when you should only go 24 months. And I'll get back to that in a second. But the tenant buyer, when it got up near the 2-year point, she said, I've got 48 months to get my mortgage. And I told her, why would you do that? Because it's not paying down your principal. So if you can transition and get your mortgage sooner, that's better for you. So I was looking out for her best interest rather than my own, because I could have milked it.
Yeah, the longer, so good point. I said earlier, the quicker they get paid, the quicker the tenant buyer gets a loan, the quicker we get paid. But theoretically, the longer the term, the more money we make at the end of the day. Our payday 3 is enormous. It's almost like we're the seller. We have to wait for our money. But yeah, the longer the term, the more money we make. And if you have multiple deals and you have multiple payday 3s coming in, then that's ideal, because that's how you start building the business that you're building, which is now you have predictions. Okay, I know in 2026 I'm going to have 2 or 3 payday 3s. I know in 2027 I'm going to have another payday 3, and so you can start projecting what your revenue is going to be in the upcoming years with these payday 3s. So that's pretty cool.
And the other reason, when I was getting back to the 24 months and not going 48 months on a lease purchase, is if you have a nightmare tenant buyer. Now, I've never had one, but if you were to have one, you're stuck with them for 48 months, unless they default. You can always extend the 24-month period if something happens. It's much harder to go backwards.
But you did a good job as far as, again, this episode might just be called Transactions with Integrity, because you went back to them and said, hey, I'm looking out for you. It's probably better that you cash out early. Even though I would make more money, it's probably better for you to cash out now, so that you can start paying down that principal on that house. So good stuff, Rick. Welcome back. You're back from San Antonio. Did you go on the Riverwalk?
Nope, been there before on some of the other trips I've done out there, but had some outstanding Mexican food for dinner.
There you go. Was it Tex-Mex?
No, it was Mexican food.
Real Mexican. Okay.
Yep.
Welcome back. It's good to see you. It wasn't the same without you. So welcome back.
Thanks.
All right. Congrats on your payday 3. All right, everybody.
Congrats on your taking.
Thank you. Peace out. We'll see you guys next week. Later.
Take care, everyone.